Let's hit the high road. Let's hit the high road. It's the first touch, strong connection. It lays deep in your soul. Feel the kindness strongly coming. 'Cause you can achieve your goal. Let's hit the high road. Let's hit the high road.
Hi, it's Nancy Earald, and welcome to High Road to Humanity. And I have a really special lady here today. Sally McQuillen has joined us, and welcome to the show, Sally.
Thank you, Nancy, for having me. So good to be with you.
I'm excited you're here. This is a show, well, it's for everybody, but she's written Reaching for Beautiful. And this is for people who have lost a child. This is for anybody who has gone through grief and wants to know that there is life after this one. And it's a memoir of loving and losing a wild child because Christopher was a wild child. And I'll just mention if you watch my show, Joe McQuillen, her husband, has been on my show a couple times. He's written a couple books about Christopher, but today we have his mom, Sally, and I really want to dedicate this to you. What a beautiful book. First of all, let me just say, I want a tribute to your son, by the way.
Thank you. I did want it to be something to honor him and capture his life story, and then also give. I tried to do a number of things. I hope I've accomplished them, but I wanted to give this inside look at grief over the loss of a child. And I also wanted to, um, I don't know, honor him so much and just bring his spirit forward.
I agree. He was a beautiful soul. How old was he when he passed? Remind me.
So it was 9 years ago, January of 2016. So hard to believe. And he was 21 years old. He and three other friends, they decided to go up to a friend's lake house. They were on holiday break from college. And I imagined that it would be, just a bunch of guys hanging out. Of course, I knew they'd be partying, but I figured it would be pretty chill. And in his inimitable way, he and four boys decided to go on an adventure, and so they went out into a frozen lake in a canoe, and heartbreakingly, none of them survived.
Yeah, it's a very sad story. And I commend you for telling the story. We were talking before the show. It took you a long time to be able, well, you're busy anyway. Let me read your bio, you guys. She's got a really cool bio. It's in the back of the book here. Sally McQuillen is a psychotherapist. She's in private practice. She specializes in addiction, grief, and trauma recovery. Isn't that crazy that that's what you specialize in?
Right, of course it is.
Oh, no
I
accidents,
do.
right? Right?
No.
She's an avid reader with a double major in writing and dance criticism in college. She began working in public relations and marketing prior to obtaining her master's degree in social work. She and her husband live on the north side, or north shore of Chicago, where they raise their three children. So this is your first book, and yeah, so it took you a while to get back to work, I would imagine, after this.
I did take 7 months off, and I'm so grateful to my therapist, who encouraged me to really do that. I was in such, and I don't know, I think people increasingly understand, but grief and grief in particular over the loss of a child is so traumatic. It's inherently traumatic. And because it's out of time, and this was unexpected, albeit I'd been striving for years to, attempt to rein my wild child in unsuccessfully. And so it really was essential that I take that time and
I think
learn
that's
how to, I'd always preached taking good care of oneself to my
Yeah.
clients, but then it was up to me to begin to really do that at a deeper level.
Yeah.
And nowadays we hear about self-care, 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 and
Mhm.
the truth is that you can't even entirely access all of your resources at that time. I was just a shell of myself.
Yeah.
Um,
You talk about that in the book. I thought that was really it was powerful to read. You talk about them setting up the funeral. Joe was is Catholic and you're Protestant, but he went ahead and set it up with the priest. You were at home and you shared your feelings and your thoughts. You guys, you got to read this. It's really powerful to read. You also talk about a letter, which I thought was so intriguing that you read at the funeral. And I thought that was really cool. I've never really seen that before. You love this child so dearly. You had written a letter to him. Do you want to talk about that real quick?
I do. It's funny because I remember I had this idea. Oops, I've lost you for a second.
Oh, okay.
This idea that I would write love letters to my children. I have two living children, Caroline and William, and that I would attempt to write them an annual love letter. And you know how it is, like Christopher being my firstborn, he has this incredibly, everything is tracked in his baby book. And then, my youngest, by the time he came around 6 years later, he was sort of like, do I have a baby book? What was my first word, and I kind of
Yeah,
couldn't remember, because it was just such
yeah.
a busy time. And so I did. I had written a number of love letters to each of them, not, necessarily consistently, but the love letter that I wrote to Christopher when he was a year old, I was just so struck upon reading it after he died. I don't know how I stumbled on it or, what I was looking for, but it
Mhm.
really it just is how I felt about him, throughout the course of his life and continue to today.
Yeah, I'm going to read. Well, I don't know. Do you want to read a little bit of it? Did you pull it up? You have
I
it.
don't, you have it in front of you. That would be wonderful
I'm
if
just
you
trying to think. I'm looking to see if I have which. Okay, wait a minute.
have my book.
Let's
I
see if
have
I can find it real quick. I
my,
did mark it because I marked the end. I wanted to read the end, so I don't know if I have it marked. I don't know what page it's on. Oh, wait, hold on. Yes, I have it right
you
here.
do? Okay, I was going to try
Page
to.
27, right? Yes, here we go. This is beautiful. This is why I'm going to read this because I'm an empath and I started to get teary on this one. I am giddy. I am simply wild about you. My feelings for you are beyond deep in a way that I am certain I share with mothers everywhere. My heart is inside out. I have an adolescent-like crush that won't fade with the passage of time. You are a sparkler in the heart of a 4th of July night. You are my baby boy, already my 1-year-old firstborn son. Christopher, you are a bright-eyed gift from God. So clearly you from the very start. I am not surprised by your strong presence and independence, but in awe of its coexistence with your sensitivity and innocent wonder. You are strong and willful, directly directing all your energy outward in motion. You are an extremely active baby. There have been moments I have wished that you would learn or you would lean your head on my shoulder for just a moment longer before something new caught your eye. But those moments have been treasured that much more for their briefity. Briefity, I guess. Love, that's a cool word. You love being around people. You have consistently drawn people to you by reaching out and charming them as they stop to tell me how pretty your eyes are. Your family is altered by the brightness of your being. What I believed to be my capacity for love has grown beyond fullness. My prayer for you is that you experience the sheer joy you have enabled me to know. How beautiful. He was a or charismatic young man, wasn't he? With beautiful blue eyes. Is that proper to say that?
Well, I'm so biased, but I
But that's the impression I get, right?
yes, I absolutely, and I've often shared that. I think it was his godmother, my sister-in-law, Marcia, who said, "Oh, at a certain point, he looks a little like Brad Pitt, does he not?"
I read
And
that.
he really did have a resemblance to Brad Pitt. And if you saw Brad Pitt and A River Runs Through It or Legends Before the Fall, just the whole way that the light kind of runs through him, that was Christopher. And funnily enough, he would later be at bars, insisting to women that yes, he was related to Brad.
Oh my God.
They were cousins, and they'd buy it.
And they buy it every time.
Yeah.
Well, let's rewind a little bit. So, Joe, Irish Catholic, he took over the news crews were at your house after this accident. I mean, I'm going to take it back a little bit. This was a major situation. It wasn't just your son, it was three other boys. They were all college classmates, I would imagine. So this was gigantic in the community, I would imagine.
Yes, it was. And so it was really too much, and still is in a way too much, to fathom that other parents were simultaneously enduring their own trauma and loss. And
Mhm.
so, but it also meant that there was a very public nature to this. And bless my husband for being able to face that kind of exposure better than I.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, it having happened the way that it did, and being in a smaller community that is a very loving and supportive community, there were people reaching out, and it helped carry us. It really kept me, I use the word tethered, because I felt like I was just sort of free falling. And
Yeah. Like
so,
you're out of your body, you say at one point.
oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
because a part of me was missing. And
Have you stayed in contact with the other families? I'm just curious.
yes, everybody often wants to know the answer to that. And these young men had come together because they all knew the young man whose lake house it was. I know that Chris was friends with each of them, but I didn't know two of them. I did know one of them, and it's just too much to bear to think about. And I'll tell you what, Nancy, twice recently in the news, I've heard about several incidents where um, accidents happened with young people. One was recently in my friend's home in Marin, California, and then I've read the news about a car accident that took place in Florida with a bunch of kids on their spring break. And it just evokes so much pain, because now, 9 years later, I can appreciate how that impacts so many people, how it just permeates,
The ripple effect.
the ripple effect. Of
Yeah.
course, at that time, I wasn't in a position to be thinking about, just neighbors or friends or parents, or all of the people who were processing that in their own way.
Yeah. Couple things that really hit me in the book. One is, well, you talk about whether or not you want to have an open casket or not, and I thought that was interesting. But I think after you saw him and you go through that and talk about when you saw him, that you really felt that everyone should see him for closure, I guess. Is that what you felt for closure more than anything?
You know, I remembered having been to just one or two open casket services. And because I grew up in the Protestant faith and that was not something that I had been exposed to as much, it made me really anxious to think about. But I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to lay my eyes on my child. Um, and I think that it was part of coming to believe that that we all are essence, that we are souls, that we are spirits, because in looking at his beautiful body, his vessel without his spirit in it, it was different. And so I just had this sense that he'd gone somewhere. Yeah.
Right. That's why I asked you the question because it really hit me that at that point, and I thank you for, I know that's difficult, but thank you for sharing that because you realize that we are these energetic souls and that he wasn't there anymore. And that's huge because then you come to a whole different way of looking at life.
You start
You
to
know?
open your mind and contemplate and try to make meaning. And you're desperate to make meaning of it. And I was desperate to find him,
Right.
had he gone, because I'd certainly heard mention of heaven, but I just didn't have, I hadn't gotten that far. There's
Yeah.
been nothing in my life that had really taken me to that point of contemplating it.
Yeah. Another thing I wrote down that I thought was really interesting because I wear a hematite necklace. And I do it because it's my angel necklace, but it also grounds me. And Chris had given you a Christmas necklace. I thought that was crazy wild. Will you talk about that real quick?
Absolutely. He, here he was 21 and wanting to be sort of grown up enough to get his mama a Christmas gift on his own instead of going in with the rest of the family. And
Yeah.
so he had gone to a shop in a mall with a friend and picked out a necklace. And actually, I think something was broken, and so he actually went back and spoke to the salesperson, and then ended up finding a different necklace that he loved even more, which was a tree of life.
Mhm.
And I relied on that necklace. I also now have other talismans that I wear that are um, like there was no tomorrow. And it became, and Christopher became a source of strength for me, like a tree. I mean, I really needed to be like grounded back in
Yeah. Isn't
the
that
world.
interesting?
Like as if he'd known. Yeah. As
Well,
if
yeah, because it's that stone this is for grounding.
And then the fact that it had yes,
The
that
tree of life.
exactly.
Well, yeah. I
And
mean, that was like, what?
I
That
know
was
it.
it was wonderful. Well, I do want to talk about you did go see a medium. So let's talk about this part of it because Joe did this too, and we'll get into him, but I want to talk about you. You decide to go see this medium in Denver. You bring Chris's scarf with you. I don't want to give your whole book away. It's very good, you guys. But I do want to hit on some of these high points. Talk about this because people, are leery sometimes. But I will say, as a person who has connected people with the other side and who has brought messages in, it's so comforting to the person, is what I believe. So that's why I have brought messages forth. Well, not me, my angel, and the Lord, of course. But talk to us about how your experience.
Again, Joey, my husband, it was really interesting because, yeah, there can be, this whole world opens up to you. This idea of mediums, like who would have, like, it just wasn't kind of on my radar. But
Right?
Joe had been to one, and he had a pretty powerful experience, and so I don't know if it was the day that Christopher passed, but it may have been the next day. He immediately reached out to a medium that he'd formerly been in contact with,
Yeah.
and she reassured him.
Mhm.
And so he was, and he's pretty powerful. It's sort of like, okay, Sal, you should do this. You should try this. And I was a little skeptical, sort of like, well, okay, let's. And then, various friends during the course of those early weeks were recommending that I try to do this. And one friend was so generous that she said, I've got you a reading with this woman,
Oh
and
my God.
you're going to do a small group. And then it was going to be it was only in Denver. And so then it was like, oh my gosh, do I spend money to fly to Denver and spend the night in a hotel? And then, there's something that also happens after your world has been rocked. It's like, well, why not?
Right.
In
What do you got
another
to lose?
Exactly, right. My
Yeah.
worst fear has already come to reality. And so yeah, so I went there, and I sort of chuckle at myself because I sat in this small group, not wanting to say anything about who I was hoping this medium might channel in case it would give it away and she would know
Pick
ahead
up on
of
something.
time, right? Because God forbid, maybe she researched us or something.
Right.
And lo and behold, my brother-in-law actually was the first one that she channeled, and he came into her into her mind in such a way that he was his exact personality, which was so much like my husband. And it really gave me incredible pause. It was like, this sure seems like Jerry. He was, insistent and interrupting her and making sure she really knew that he was there. And then he was speaking to other family members on the McQuillen side. And then ultimately other people were being read, and Christopher did end up coming through. And it was um, just miraculous to me, very validating. There were a number of ways that it was sort of like I couldn't, I couldn't, like my disbelief, just had to be set aside.
Mhm. Now, I get this feeling, but I'm going to ask you this question, that after that you started to meditate and maybe you do connect with him on your own.
I am such like you, I'm an empath and very intuitive and a feeler. And so there's just this, it is like a sixth sense that when he's present. And
Mm.
and then we've been so fortunate because then, of course, we were seeing more mediums than you could count,
Yeah,
because we just wanted to feel him. And,
right,
um,
right.
and we, and he's, so apparently, and you know better than I, but spirits are going to be who they are. And so being powerful, he was powerful here on earth, and he's certainly powerful in spirit. He would come through and let himself be known.
I love that. Now, because what I guess I feel and I see with you and Joe both, I mean, it's totally changed you both. And actually for the better, because you've opened up to spirituality, to our creator, to you can say God, you can say spirit, whatever you feel comfortable with, but it's that love energy. And you know that this isn't it. There's more on the other side. And it actually is joyful to know that, you'll get to see him again and he'll be waiting for you.
I mean, I admit it, like, Joe has such conviction, and
Yeah.
there's this part of me that, is just humanly a little bit like, oh, I sure hope that's true. Like it's
Yeah.
got to be true. I'm
Yeah.
counting on it,
Yeah.
and he's given me, so many reasons to believe that that will be the case. And I've been reassured of that. So,
Want to talk a little bit about his addictions, if it's okay,
of course,
because it will help other families, I think. So he was, I mean, all kids go through this stuff, and I think alcohol was his addiction, and that's what they were drinking that night when they got in the canoe. So they weren't, they were partying or whatever, which is normal.
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, but that's something that he went through, and I think you actually had him. He actually went to, was it Arizona, right? Do you want to talk about that a little bit,
I
or?
do, because this memoir, Reaching for Beautiful, is also about raising a child who is challenging, who's different, and who, um, you know, it's to be affected by addiction, is really powerful. And we have this legacy of addiction. So both Joey and I are in recovery ourselves from addiction. And, um, my father was an alcoholic. And then to be in a position where I was trying to prevent, each of my children from developing addiction themselves and not be able to achieve that. And even when Christopher was little and we diagnosed him with attention deficit, there was a learning curve. There was this getting to discover even though my husband is, and but he didn't even know it until we diagnosed Christopher. We were behind the eight ball, and maybe sort of ahead of the curve in terms of making different discoveries. But being a recovering alcoholic is such a gift because it actually gave me a spiritual foundation. And then moving through some of these life lessons with Christopher, and intervening and getting him help so that he could have a period. He had a 3-year period where he was clean and sober. And then a few years before he died, he wanted to go to college and be like all of his peers who, were abusing those things and having fun and in a fraternity, and he had that experience as well. And although I was afraid at the time, I was also striving to manage my fear. And in hindsight, there's so much that I've learned. And there's so many ways that Christopher has helped me grow and appreciate that he was not meant to be here forever. He was meant to live his life in his incredibly big, bold way. And I also feel like he can help more people because he had such an open heart from heaven.
Hmm.
I mean,
That's
he's made a tremendous impact here while he was here, but I think he continues to shine a light
I
on.
agree. I agree. He's been around all day, so I agree with that. I want to tell the audience, you tell your story about, I'm not going to give it all away. I want the audience to read it, how you and Joe met, and had problems and you had just gone through, recovering from drinking and that type of thing. So you have to read the story. I love that you added that, and I think it's great that you added about Chris's, difficulties that he went through. But you know what bugs me, honestly? I was
What?
like, Chris went through all this and he got sober and he was doing so good. And for this to happen, because he made it through. That's what drove me. I was like, he made it. And then, yeah, and it was just the stupid thing that happened. You know what I'm saying? That's
I
how,
do, and it could happen, and it does
yeah,
regrettably happen to way too many young people who are, maybe variations of his kind of invincible recklessness.
yeah, yeah.
He'd had 3 near-death experiences even before he passed.
You want to
And
talk about that for a minute?
sure, I mean, he had me at the edge of my seat from the very beginning in every way. And so you're right, like the way you kind of responded to that as a mother is sort of like just when you think, they're safe and sound,
Yeah.
just when you sort of
Like you can breathe, like you're okay.
right,
He's in
right.
college. We've made it through all this stuff. And I'm just like, what? You know?
And I think that it's sort of like that was not his path, and for some reason, it's not mine. Some of
Mhm.
the mediums that we've spoken to have talked about like signing some sort of contract before you get here, and sort of saying, okay, um, this will be my life's challenge. And my life's challenge, one of them, is to find ways to let go of fear, even when the roller coaster continues to go up and down.
Mhm.
And I did feel briefly like when he died, wait a minute, I've been trying to release fear and let him live his own life. Is the fact that I lost him, does that mean I should have continued to try to rein him in? And
Fearful? No, you
like, should I
can't.
have locked him up? And
No.
and of course not, because
Yeah.
he couldn't he couldn't be reined in, and he wouldn't have been all of the beautiful things that he was, so free spirited, my wild
Mhm.
Mustang in the moment. And that's a big part of what I love about him, you know.
So you feel this was written?
I feel it was written.
Okay. It usually is, where the things happen to us in life so that we are catapulted to learn more. Isn't that interesting? And get closer to spirit, get closer to our own selves, to go to work on ourselves. The fear thing you talk about, I work on myself. I tell the audience it's really, people keep looking outside of themselves for the answer, and the answers are within. And it takes, you know, something like this or something, traumatic. It's always a death or a loss of a job or, a divorce. There's a lot of things, but it catapults us often to a new level.
There's no doubt about that. And I've come to, again, Christopher has offered my life so much meaning, and his you losing him, and the like the perspective that you get. And I almost feel like he's telepathically said, Mom, love is the only thing that matters. And so really, evolving and growing such so that we can
Yeah.
set our fear aside, set our um, you know, ego aside to the best of our ability, in human form, and just rise above. That's, hence reaching for beautiful, always sort of rising, because it's and 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 I did suffer and can suffer. I all of this being said, I still experience a missing of him. It's
Sure.
not the same. Um, but through that, in sort of letting myself move through that, and it's taken a long time, and it still ebbs and flows. Um, you can find the light.
There you go. What about your other children? Do you mind talking about how have they handled this? How have they handled you guys going to see mediums? I mean, how's that whole thing been going?
Right, I know. I think they're sort of like
Did they roll their eyes and go, oh my goodness?
absolutely initially,
I
absolutely,
figured.
very, very much so.
Yeah.
And Caroline was 19 at the time, and William was only 16.
Wow.
And so a lot of life has happened since, and each and every one of us have had our own unique journey with grief. And so I don't go into too much of their story because it's theirs.
I
Um,
agree.
what I did write, where I did write about them, I made sure they approved of what I had to say. And
Yeah.
they would say that for them, it was a little bit more complex, a little less pure, a little bit more like, oh, wait a minute, he took up so much of your time and energy in life, and then he was, we sent him away. He was not around even during periods of time when Joe and I would be visiting, and the kids would visit when they could, but they were living their lives and, going to school and such. And so they'd already been missing him, and they'd also been on the receiving end of the parts of him that weren't easy to love, the parts where he
They
was
saw the good and the bad. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, uh, Christopher kind of has this legendary status, and I think deservedly so. But at the same time, he was very human, and he
Yeah.
could be difficult as a big brother.
Yeah, that's true. I like what you said. I just want to go back really quick and talk about the love and the fear, because that's what it boils down to. You can either be fearful, you can live in fear, you can live in love. And that's the biggest message that I, feel that Christopher has brought forth. It's the truth. It's really about love. If we could just be more compassionate and kinder to each other. And what is there a message that you feel that Chris has brought forth that you want to share with the audience before we get out of here today? What do you want to share? What do you want to tell us? We got a couple more minutes. What's
Well,
important that
I
people need to
just,
know?
I think continuing to keep one's heart open. It'd be so easy when there's loss, when there's pain. I recognize it so much within myself that there's this inclination to want to retreat. I developed social anxiety a
Mm.
little bit after Chris died, which was not like me. And, Chris was so very social. And so to be able to stay connected to other people with an open heart has meant that while he's no longer here in human form, his friends are, his friends' children are, his all sorts of people who came out of the woodwork to let us know what he'd been able to do to offer them unconditional, non-judgmental acceptance. And
That's cool. That's really
it's pretty
cool.
cool. And
Yeah.
so to embody him, to embody our loved ones who've gone before us, to sort of seize the moment as he would. That's all I'm aspiring to do.
Yeah, he
Keep.
made a difference. He really made a difference. I'm going to read the afterword in this book because the book is called Reaching for Beautiful. It's by Sally McQuillen. You guys need to pick this up. I'm just going to read this real quick. It just hit me really hard today. So it took me 7 years, she says, to write Reaching for Beautiful, which I condensed into the first year of my grief journey. And it took me 7 years, 4 months, and 19 days after losing Christopher to start to feel like myself again. I want to normalize the fact that the grief process for those suffering the loss of a child lasts a lifetime. My acute early grief lasted at least 4 years, even though to the outside world I appeared to be functioning. The third year I cried nearly every day, with few exceptions. The first 2 years I cried every day, endlessly surrendering to waves of sorrow or bracing against them. For as long as I'm alive, I have no doubt that I will periodically be ambushed by an overpowering yearning. I will descend into an excruciating ache I couldn't have fathomed before my heart was struck. But I will do my best to welcome grief when it overtakes me, as it is an outlet for my affection and boundless love for my boy. It reminds me that Christopher's absence on this earth cannot ever, will not ever be filled. I know that I will miss him many moments of every day, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. Since my grief is now more integrated, its gifts are rising to meet me. I have come back home to myself, stronger, with the consolation that my son's spirit is fueling me at my core. I no longer think of him as out of reach. He inspires me to go beyond the limits of fear toward love multiplied. I feel him with me often, especially when I'm in awe of nature's beauty. It's as if I'm looking at his beautiful face when the sun's bright rays break out from a cloud-filled sky, giving him a hug when a soft, warm breeze gently finds me, or listening to his voice when light dances playfully on the water. This is her book. I hope you guys have a fabulous day. Thanks for coming, Sally. God bless.
Hold your head high, the world is coming. Watch the colors lift your soul. Connect the dots and keep the motion. Can achieve your goal. Let's hit the high road. Let's hit the high road. It's the first touch, strong connection. It lays deep in your soul. Feel the kindness strongly coming, 'cause you can achieve